I've been helping to lead men's groups for more than 10 years now, and I'm passionate about positive masculinity and developing it in the world. Listen to this 14th century poem by the Persian poet Hafiz. The small man builds cages for everyone he knows, but the sage, who has to duck his head when the moon is low, keeps dropping keys all night long for the beautiful rowdy prisoners. The small man builds cages for everyone he knows, but the sage, who has to duck his head when the moon is low, keeps dropping keys all night long for the beautiful rowdy prisoners. Obviously, this poem can apply to anybody, not just men, but I think it's really helpful when explaining the magic of men's groups. From the moment we're born, life throws things at us that make us feel vulnerable. The problem is, for many years, men were not given permission to be vulnerable. So to deal with that contradiction, a lot of us felt that the only option was to make ourselves big. And when we're in that frame of mind, we see life as a competition. In order to protect myself, I have to make you feel small, I have to put you in your place. And we have to admit that that goes hand in hand with a certain kind of male energy that uses power to dominate others. But the poet sees through that. He sees through the big man to the small, vulnerable person underneath. There is a more subtle version of the small man, though, who compensates for his fear and vulnerability not through dominance, but by controlling and manipulating other people in a more subtle way. And we're all capable of that. In men's groups, we give each other permission to be real. We encourage each other. We give each other the courage to talk about not just our successes, but our failures as well. And the more we do that, the more we reduce the need to strengthen ourselves by diminishing other people. We break the chain that can form where you get a series of men reaching through the bars of their cage to try and drag others into a cage of their own. But what about these beautiful rowdy prisoners? I think we can all feel stuck, trapped, imprisoned in our lives. It may be that we've been imprisoned by the expectations of other people, by the things they've done to us, the things they've said to us. We might be stuck with our own wounds, the things that have happened to us, and we can't get beyond them. We might be trapped in our own patterns and repeating ways of doing things. The problem with that is that we end up seeing ourselves, if we're not careful, as victims. And the poet has a message for us. We're not meant to be imprisoned. He reminds us that we're supposed to be free. We can be free. I love the way the poet describes the prisoners, though. He calls them beautiful, rowdy prisoners. Over the last few years as a society, we've had to focus on the small man who builds cages, the toxic masculinity, and there's been a lot of it about. But are we in danger of giving the message, especially to young men, that that's all men are? Men do need to hear that being a man is something wonderful and beautiful. The poet also says we're rowdy, Now, that's a tricky one, especially in the wake of the riots we've had in the UK recently. Rowdy doesn't feel like a especially healthy thing to be. But there is an undeniable, glorious wildness about men. And at its best, it is a gift to the world. So, in men's groups, we witness each other looking at the things that have kept us imprisoned, and we witness each other gradually breaking free from them. We encounter the beauty that is in the souls of other men and in our own, and we allow a space for healthy wildness. So, what is a sage? Well, he's the opposite of the small man, but it's not just that he's not small, he reaches up to the heavens. He has to duck his head when the moon is low. It would be tempting to think that the poet has in mind here a kind of special individual who has a sort of supernatural wisdom. But I think the point the poem is making is that we can all be a sage. A sage is someone who doesn't ignore his wounds, but isn't defined by them. He is able to take his gifts and his failures and connect them to something bigger than himself. The sage is able to place his own personal story within the bigger story of his people. He knows the rhythms of the natural world and he can learn from them. The sage can listen to his own thoughts, feelings, emotions, and act accordingly. These are things that we can all learn to do and be, but it helps if we have someone who can show us the way. And a true wise man, a true sage, doesn't just keep what he's learned to himself, but he wants to share it with others to help them along on their journey. And he doesn't break the cages open for them, he just drops keys for them to find their own way out. And he keeps doing it. So it's a constant flow of generosity to others. Interestingly, the poet says that he does it all night long. I wonder if that's a way of saying that the sage doesn't offer his wisdom in a showy way in broad daylight, but quietly, even mischievously. He offers gifts of wisdom to people, perhaps when they don't even realize he's doing it. Or perhaps it's saying that it's when we're in the dark that we really need the wisdom and guidance of others, of a wiser person. Just as men in cages lead to other men in cages, sages develop other sages. There's an ongoing development of wisdom, passing it on from one man to the next, from one generation to the next. And that's what we want to do in the men's work we do. In men's groups, we drop keys for each other. It's often in hearing another man's story, gaining their perspective on their life, that we find a key to unlock our own cage. And as we tell our stories, we help other men find keys as well. A final word of warning. I can be a sage today and go back to being a man who builds cages tomorrow. The work never stops, but a men's group is a really good place to do it.